Cause, from a Baha'i viewpoint, hell rank higher than that. So I'm not talking about John Doe. They're not just people appointed to do something. There were 50 hands of the cause of God appointed in the Baha'i faith. Baha'u'llah himself appointed 4, his son Abul Baha appointed 4, and the guardian appointed 42. And of that, many of them were appointed after their passing. Several of them, if you're interested in that type of information, I have their names of those who were appointed posthumously because they're very famous people in the Baha'i faith. And Esselmont, who wrote this little book that you're familiar with, Haji Amin, he was a great collector of the Baha'i funds in Iran. Keith Ransom Kaler, which was the most remarkable writer of all the hands in my mind. I don't know if many of you not read anything she ever wrote. She was a tremendously brilliant woman. Martha Root, who was the most outstanding of all the hands of the cause, was a woman, not a man. She traveled all over the world and has a good book you could read about her life. John Henry Hyde Dunn was appointed. He and his wife, Mother Dunn, were both hands of the cause, but he was appointed after he died. His wife appointed, she's still alive. They did all their fine work in Australia, but they left this country to do it. Syed Mustafa, Abu Jalil Bey, Muhammad, I can't pronounce it, Taki Isfahani. Roy Wilhelm, who the Guardian wrote when he died, was a saint in this country. He was a wonderful human being. And Louis Gregory, who was the most outstanding African-American Baha'i in this country. So those are the ones the Guardian appointed after their death. The rest of them were alive when he appointed them, and I can only talk meaningfully about those I knew. I knew 17 of them. I worked with 17 of them at different times. And I can only share, a few stories because I could talk all day and all night about it. To be quite candid with you, I would not be here if it were not hands of the cause. That's simple. I don't make any bones about it. I was a Baha'i when there was no integration. We got shot at, cars bombed, house next to mine blown all to hell in Florida. There was no fun in the early days when I was a Baha'i. In 1959, I became a Baha'i. And I was appointed almost immediately by Bill Sears and Mr. Kadim to be an auxiliary board member, and I had 12 states from Texas through Florida and the Carolinas. Curtis Kelsey came down a little later, and he was a board member. He had worked with Abul Baha and installed the lights that you have now still in Haifa with the Shrine of Bob and Baha'u'llah and in Bajib. So we worked together, and Bill Tucker from North Carolina was appointed. But that was it for the whole South. I knew every living Baha'i from Texas to the bottom of Florida up to North Carolina, every one of them. I visited. And I had a job that enabled me to do it. And were it not for the prayers, I wouldn't have made it. I don't play any games about it, friends. It was tough. So it was not easy. But if you went to a Baha'i fireside in these little places, you find them through the southern states, there was so much spirit and so much love in them, you wouldn't leave till 1 or 2 in the morning. Nobody did. It wasn't because we knew so much. It's because the love between the Baha'is was that strong. And it was not fake, friend. Your life depended on each other. I traveled through all the southern states, Mississippi, Louisiana, all these places with an African-American guy, Wilbert Solomon. He must have weighed 255 pounds, played tackle at Morehouse College in Atlanta. And a white man traveling with a black man was a dangerous proposition. First thing we did when we went in a motel is to open up the telephone and see if somebody was tapping the phone or something, or poke up the stuff, the room, see if they're tapping. It was dangerous. And I want to set the stage for that because that's what the hands had to deal with in this part of the world. As far as I know personally, first hand to ever set foot in this state was Martha Root. I met a lady, the first Baha'i in Austin, who met her in Austin. Leroy Iwas later, who was the secretary of the Guardian, when the Guardian passed away, he was secretary. Been on our NSA many years. Before that, he came to this state. Mr. Kadim came to this state. Mr. Sears came to this state. If there are others, I was not aware of it. those I knew about. And so that's for the Texas end of it. But I felt like maybe the easiest thing I could do to make it meaningful to you, just tell you a few stories about what it was like to be with these men and women. And I want to say this in a way that I hope is not it doesn't put you off. They weren't people like you and me, friend. Don't you ever believe a word of that. They were so much more spiritual than you and me. We're not involved in it, every one of them. And they were nothing alike as individuals, at all. So I will read you the names of the ones that I knew well, and you can ask me whatever you want to know about any one of them, if some of them interest you at all. Many of you knew some of them, many of you didn't know all of them, and so forth. I knew Mr. Fortan very well. I knew Dr. Giaccheri. I served with Giaccheri this year, and Robarts and Kadem. Leroy Iwas I knew well. Mr. Samandari, I would like to share an experience I had with him because he was one of the most remarkable human beings I ever met in my entire life. And many of you may have known him. Mr. Alayi, Shulai Alayi, he's buried out in Arizona incident up right near Phoenix. Musa Banani, I was in his home in Africa and he was alive. Mr. Kadem, Rahia Kadem, of course, many of you met or saw her. Paul Haney, Mr. Varga, then Dr. Varga, the hand of the cause. He was very different than most Persians. I'll tell you why. And please don't get hurt if I say something to offend you, okay? Do me that favor. I'm a Texan and I'm direct. Most of you Persians like butterflies. You flip around. I'm a bumblebee. That's a very different proposition. Well, Varga was a bumblebee. And the most unusual Persian I ever saw. Like you ask a straight question, he gave you a straight answer. Kind and loving as a human could be, but he gave you a straight answer. No. He didn't. He was no bumblebee. I mean, no butterfly talker. So Agnes Alexander, she was only one of two women mentioned in the whole tablets of the Divine Plan. She was part of the root. I knew Agnes. Mr. Fazey, many of you knew, one of the kindest humans God Almighty ever created anywhere at any time in history. That man is so kind, it's unbelievable. And I know if it were not for he and Bill Sears, I wouldn't be sitting here. No way in hell or heaven. And I don't play any games with that. Because they held my hand in some very difficult times in my life. And it wasn't easy serving on your National Assembly in the 60s, and I did. And it was no easy proposition. And those men were angels, angels, angels. Dr. Mahajer, the most unusual human being I ever met in my life. Nobody like him. If you ever want to see the living, walking image of action, that was Mahajer. He had no more time to sit around and you were deep in classes and nothing. He wanted you out moving and teaching. And he went with you if necessary. He was a mover and a shaker if God ever created one. And died as a very young man. He wasn't old when he died. He was only 56 years old when he died. Enoch Olinga, he was only 53 when he died. The only African appointed a hand of the cause. And I have an interesting story about him. I want to tell you, if I forget it, remind me. Mr. Robarts, Canadian, and of course Bill Sears. But I'd like to open with telling a story about a man that you all know of or maybe have seen. Mr. Samandari, the hand of the cause. And, he was a little guy. I went to the London Congress, World Congress, first one we ever had in '63 in London. And he was speaking down front, Marzi Gill was his translator. He had a voice like a lion, this little bitty guy, you know. And I didn't walk up to shake his hand or meet him anything. All these people were crowded around, you know. And later, I was back in this country in the 60s. I was a member of your National Assembly. And we had word he was coming with his son, Mehdi, that had been up in Canada. And we had rented a little African-American AME church camp down in Georgia, near Fort Valley, Georgia, Camp Hope. And we were having a meeting there, and he was gonna visit there. And everybody was excited. I lived in Atlanta at that time, and he was already old. He was over 90 when he was making that trip. And so House notified every NSA, in particular our NSA, don't let the Baha'is crowd around him and push him and, make it difficult for him, because his health was just so fragile. And so I was trying my best to be as obedient as I could be to it. And I was not able to get out to the little camp early on the day he was arriving. So I left a little late because it had to work. And I didn't in this kind of detail, but I have to tell the story the way I remember. Down the U.S. Highway 75 interstate, Eisenhower just opened his interstate system and got down to a little place called Perry, Georgia. And the camp was about 11 miles inland from there, and I was hungry, and I knew I was too late to eat breakfast at the camp. So I drove out to, saw Holiday Inn on the side of the road and went in there to pull off, because it had a little restaurant attached to it, and walked in there, and there was the man. Obviously, I recognized him. I'd seen him in Haifa with his son. Now, I was doing my best to be obedient, and I walked as far away from him as I could get. He's over there next to the window, like you two guys in the back, right back there. He was over there eating at a table. So I went as far away as I could get to the table over here at this small restaurant, right, to get away. And I didn't stare at him or wave at him and all that kind of bullshit. I was minding my own business. I ate my breakfast. And he was still sitting chatting with his son. When I got up to leave, I walked over to the counter to pay my bill. God is my witness. That man got it from that table he was eating. He walked over there and he gave me the more gentle hug I ever had in my life. Kissed me on both cheeks. And he had never seen me before in my life. And you tell me how he knew I was alive. I swear to God, that's what happened. That's what I am to the gospel. I walked up behind Bill Sears one time at a convention. I think it was 1963 or 4. I was standing behind him. He never looked at me. He hadn't seen me. And in my heart, he was talking with somebody, and I wanted to have lunch with him. And all of a sudden, he just turned around and says, "I'll meet you over there at 1. We'll have lunch." I can sit here all day long and tell stories like that. There was no need of faking it around the hand of the cause. If I was in a meeting with Bill somewhere, and I'm a board member in that area and know the people, I'll guarantee you, there's something wrong in your soul. When he went out of that meeting, I'd been in a room with him. He'd asked me, "What's wrong with so-and-so? What's going on with that person?" He never saw him before, but he could feel it. Now that's what you dealt with when you were with the hand of the cause of God. So you always told the truth. You didn't play games. And you always, if Bill was alive today and I had a spiritual problem, I'll guarantee you I'd call and see if I could go see him. I have a friend, Howard Mending, Knight of Bahala off of Cape Verde Island, who's still alive over in West Virginia. He helped teach me the faith in Dallas in 1959. He had a son, Claire. He and his wife had been Knights of Bahala of Cape Verde Islands off the coast of Africa. And his son had married, had a little 8-month-old child. And his wife, Joanne, died. And within 8 months, his son was in an accident in the Oak Cliff area of Dallas, and he was killed. Well, I was living in Atlanta, and Howard was just out of it. He was just lost, that's all. He lost everything for his concern. He had 2 other children, but he was really hurting. And he called me, and I had in the meantime and arranged to go see Bill about some problem I was having from Atlanta. I was still a boardman with him. And I said, Howard, you know Bill longer than I have. Why don't you ask him if you can come with me and you can meet me at the airport in Atlanta and in Dallas. I've got to live there and we'll go together. And that's what he did. Well, I went out there and I was sitting out in the little living room area talking to Bill, and Howard's back in the kitchen talking to Marguerite. And all of a sudden, while she was talking to him, she stopped talking and she said, Howard, Abdu'l-Baha was just here. And he said, if you'd quit grieving for him, for your son, you're hurting his soul in the next world. So help me God, that's exactly what happened. Later, there's a tablet where Abdu'l-Baha says, too much grieving for your loved ones in the next world hurts their soul in the next world because they're so sensitive to it. Don't do it, give them to God. You know, after Bill Sears died himself, I was out there within an hour or two after his death. He had a close friend, Glenn, who lived up in the northwestern part of Arizona, and he had taken Marguerite and himself to a meeting in that town right by Phoenix. I can't think of the name of it right now, wealthy town. They'd been there that weekend and came back home. They were living down in Tucson, and this friend drove them. And when Marguerite came home, she found she had left her address book, which she and Bill had all those years they pioneered in Africa. And she was very upset about it, so he drove her all the way back up there to the motel that stayed and see if they'd left. They had not, and it was lost. That was Sunday evening. Bill got very ill in the morning, on Tuesday morning, before daylight, about 4 o'clock. Was trying to go to the restroom on a walker, fell. She was able to get him up. Fell again when he's going back from the restroom, about far from here to the first row there. And she couldn't get him up to get in bed. And he told her, he said, you call Dave Haddon, that was a close friend of theirs, come over here about 6 and just put a blanket over me. It's a soft rug and a pillow and I'll be all right. And she did that. And she called them at about 6:15. And they came, and he came in, and they had a cup of coffee. They went in to get Bill up, and he was gone. So when I get there at 10 o'clock, this guy Dan, who had driven them to up there near Phoenix, those meetings had already arrived. He was a close friend of theirs. And when he had walked into the room where Bill had fallen and passed away, he heard Bill Sears' voice as clear as I'm talking to you. And he told him, he said, Dan, look up in the closet there at the top. Marguerite's address book is in the top of the closet, and she's going to need it. And he got it, and he gave it to her. But you know, I'm a skeptic, and I admit it to any of you. I don't believe stuff easy. So I went in and asked Marguerite, I said, I understand you got your address book back. He said, oh yeah, Bill told Dan where it was, and he got it for me. She just took it for granted. That's the way those two people live. You know, when she first married Bill, he wasn't a Baha'i. He was a news and a very fine entertainer on television, top paid entertainer. And she knew he was interested in, and so she gave him the book because he loved drama, and he read Dawnbreakers for 3 weeks, read it 3 times, cover to cover. And because of that, he told her he was ready to become a Bobby. So she wrote a secretary right now, said at that time was Horace Holly, and asked him, and he said, just be patient with it. And he became a Baha'i. And then the Guardian announced the world embracing crusade, send Baha'is all over the world. They go, you know, be Knights of Baha'u'llah and so forth. And so Bill wanted to go, and so did Marguerite very much. But he had this big job, and if he left, he would have to close down his television show, and 56 people that helped produce it would lose their jobs, and they didn't want to do that. And yet, and here they're torn in their soul, wanting to go serve the faith, but feeling responsible for other people's welfare. Marguerite said they decided they'd say prayers for 19 days. The 16th day, in the morning, the manager of the station called and said, you don't have to worry about it anymore. He said, the sponsors of your show have decided independently of anything else that they cannot afford to sponsor it anymore. We're going to have to shut it down. They went as pioneers to Africa. In my view, don't mess with Baha'u'llah. If he wants you, he'll get you. And You know, it's a serious thing. And Jeep was talking sort of past this morning about saying who Baha'u'llah was. I'd like to read you the word himself saying that, because it's, if I didn't believe that Baha'u'llah was return of Jesus Christ and the glory of the Father, I wouldn't be here 5 seconds. I don't care if you were all saints. I believe in Jesus Christ with my whole soul. And the only reason I'm a Baha'i is because I know who Allah is. In his own words, here's what he says about it. And it's what has been to me a saving grace all my life, because this is my background and my roots. This is Abdu'l-Baha speaking, from the words of the gospel. I have yet many things to say unto you, but ye cannot bear them now. Howbeit when he, the Spirit of truth, is come, he will guide you unto all truth. That's the words of Jesus Christ in the gospel. The century has dawned when the Spirit of truth can reveal these verities to mankind. Proclaim that very word, establish the real foundations of Christianity, and deliver the nations and peoples from the bondage of forms and imitations. The cause of discord, prejudice, and animosity will be removed. The basis of love and amity be established. And friends, I was raised not in a religious background. My father was a politician, ran for state senator, was barely beat, became a close friend of the guy that beat him in the race. My earliest memories as a little child before World War II were going to these little meetings, where the political meetings every night at a different place. They were always held in church places. In the church, and they had big church make money from selling coats and so forth. So I know something about politics. I set up a very large Head Start program I helped set up in this country. I helped set up a lot of these programs that are still running today. Job Corps. I know something about dealing with politicians. The best psychologists in the world, but you close the doors, they're like dealing with a bunch of snakes sometimes, man. They want power, and they get it. And it's been true. I've worked in and out of 34 countries in every country I've been in. People who are in that business have to cut deals to get where they get. They can't have it. That's the nature of it. And it's not going to establish world peace. It never has in the history of humanity. I'd like to read you what the purpose of the Baha'i faith is from our writing, not because of what I say about it. This is what we believe. It's what we work for. It's what we give our lives for. This is the meaning of all the truth that Christ had promised would come when he came again. Baha'u'llah teaches that the world of humanity is in need of the breath of the Holy Spirit. For in spiritual quickening and enlightenment, true oneness is attained with God.